I'm Robert McCready at Evening Magic on Twitter. Katherine Heiny is a prolific writer of novels and short stories. Her stories appear in many magazines like The New Yorker and The Atlantic. Her latest book is a collection of short stories called Games and Rituals. She is a wife, a mom, and my friend on Facebook, Katherine Heiny. Thank you.
I think that we're like more than friends on Facebook now because you helped me with my story. So, and
I
you have almost the same last name as my husband and sons. So we're basically related at this point.
We might be related, and I think that if we did an ancestry and followed the common relative, it'd probably be pretty close.
Yeah, I think so too.
And we were kind of in the same area. My family settled Plum, Pennsylvania in 1796. And you're
Uh,
from the Maryland area, right? Or your family?
no, I grew up in Michigan, and my husband, whose last name is McCready, is British.
Hmm.
So yeah,
He must have been spent some time in Scotland, though, right? Or his
I
ancestors.
think that's where his father was born and then raised in England. In England. So, but yeah.
So he got a lot of the Anglo-Saxon, and I'm probably an Anglo-Saxon culturally, even though I think we're from Scotland, and then they stayed in Ireland, and then they came to America, something like that. I just know where we were then. So even if he was a McCready, he's probably Anglo-Saxon. Where are you zooming us from right now?
Right now I am in Maryland.
All right.
So I live in Maryland. I'm just not from here.
All right. And what are you drinking?
I am drinking iced tea. It's very boring. It's also very southern of me. It's sweet tea.
Oh, that is very Southern.
Yeah.
I am having Brita filtered water
Oh, well, in a wine glass though. It
in a
looks
wine glass.
nice.
It is actually a Graceland wine glass. This
Oh, I
is the
can
way that
see.
Renee Zellweger drank her water after she won an Oscar. I saw her in the after party
Oh,
on Twitter, not in real life. And and so I thought I'm gonna just have some water. I'm a little bit thirsty. Usually I make a non-alcoholic drink, and I'm gonna do water. I'm gonna get a better water filter though because I've become very granola, and I'm concerned about the fluoride in the water. And I found out that my county is fluoridated, but not every city is fluoridated in my county. And and I'm not sure that it does any good. For instance, like why is the government worried about our teeth? And we still lose our
they
teeth. So
really are. Yeah.
hmm? I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I said I don't think they really are worried about our teeth.
But they said they were, and that's why they put it in the water.
I guess.
It just seems a weird thing for them to be concerned with. So I'm glad that you're suspicious of that too.
I am.
Good. So I'm going to try to get my county to take it out because it's not even in all the cities in the county. And if I can't do that, then I'm going to get the filter that will filter it out. So that's where I'm at now. Just as a tidbit.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so your writing life began when you wrote a story and then submitted it to New Yorker and got published.
hmm
Could you talk
I
about
was
that a little bit?
sure I was in graduate school. Um I got an MFA. I actually have two MFAs from Columbia because I started in the poetry program, started my writing life as a poet. And then I transferred over to the fiction, but I was already like partway through the poetry. So I continued and got both degrees. And then I had been sending the story out. It was rejected 31 times. And then my friend Jennifer said, when did the New Yorker reject it? And I was like, I didn't send it there. And she's like, you're supposed to start there. So I was like, okay. So I sent it in on a Friday, on a Thursday, and they called on a Friday. Roger Angel called me and said, is Katherine Heiny there? And I thought it was the landlord because we were always late with the rent. So I was like, no, she's gone for the weekend. She's not here. Can I take a message? And he was like, well, this is Roger Angel from the New Yorker. And I was like, wait, it's me. It's me. And I think that just like cemented my reputation as kind of a ninny for all time. But he was calling to accept the story. I didn't even know that the mail worked that fast, let alone that people read slush that fast. It was, in many ways, it's still like the best thing that ever happened to me. It was such an amazing experience.
What was the name of that story?
It was called How to Give the Wrong Impression. And it's a second person story because at the time I read a lot of Lori Moore and um, Pam Houston. I was going to say Pam Hunter, but Pam Houston. Um, and I wanted to write something in the second person. And the story is about a girl who's in love with her roommate, but he thinks they're just friends. But she tries to make the world think that they're living together for romantic reasons.
That sounds like a Katherine Heiny story.
It does sound kind of crazy when I talk about it, but um, yeah. And sometimes I can remember that writing that story and the emotions I was feeling very clearly. And other times it seems like a good investment that I made a long time ago. It's really weird.
What do you mean a good investment?
Well, it's like writing that story doesn't really feel any different from the other stories that I wrote, but it was like that's the story that, launched my whole career, and I think it still opens doors for me. And to have a story in the New Yorker when, was so 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 exciting. But like every story that I finish is exciting. That I think you have to have a certain amount of excitement and belief that what you're writing is really good. Otherwise, you would never finish anything. But the corollary to that is that at the 2/3 mark of whatever I'm writing, I decide it's a mess and it's never going to work. And my husband says, "Are you at the 2/3 mark? Because you always think this." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I kind of do." I don't know. So, I mean, being a writer is like such a crazy making experience that I don't know.
It is. I just saw a quote today. Amanda Fortini put it on her Instagram, and it was a Gertrude Stein quote. And she said, being a genius is exhausting. All you do is sit around and do nothing for so long.
I agree. Um, I also think it's really hard. Um, I think that when you're writing, um, you can't like multitask. At least I can't. I can't like jump out of something I'm writing and dash off an email and jump back into writing. And the other day I was working really hard, and then we all went out to lunch, and I had the hardest time focusing on conversation because my head was still back. Like, I mean, I had just been writing, I left a sentence half finished on the screen. But I also think that I'm a much stronger writer than I used to be when I was very young, but I'm not actually any faster. I still end up being like 250 words per hour, is how fast I write.
When you're writing, what's your process like? Is it directly on the computer? Is it by hand first?
Um, It's directly on the computer. Sometimes I make notes on like a sort of chicken scratchy thing. And I try to go for a walk first to sort of organize my thoughts and if I need inspiration. I read a long time ago that that's what Stephen King does before he writes. And I was like, anything Stephen King does is something I want to do, but it actually does work. I think it's like increased oxygen flow to your brain. I don't know, but it helps a lot. But you can't like listen to a podcast or anything. And then um, I read online where everything is true that the your most productive hours are from 2 hours after you get up to 4 hours after you get up. I don't even know if that's true, but I always try to be at my desk for those hours, and it does help. But also, just sitting at your desk is such a huge part of it.
Is it most productive for anybody or just most productive for writers 2 hours after you get up?
Supposedly for anybody.
That's interesting about the walking. So you walk first and then write, according to Stephen King,
Hmm.
and then you can get it. I have come up with titles walking, and I and and sometimes I'll revise the title, but I'll come up with like a great title, and it seems like just a flash and it's long, and then sometimes the editor I'm working with doesn't like it, and so I keep on fiddling with it, and in the title that I have fiddled with comes from a walk also. So it's
Oh,
like the one that I remember from a walk most recently was Gloria Naylor's Island. And that story of mine is on Moo Moo House. And
oh, congratulations.
yeah, it's interesting. So, and it's about Gloria Naylor. And and I don't know, I guess I was thinking about it and Gilligan's Island came to mind and then Gloria Naylor came in there. But then I had this other title on a story that I can't get pushed anywhere because I feel like I'm pushing it on people. It's called What If I Did Something Amazing? And the feedback, they're like, but there's nothing amazing in this story. And I'm like, that's what makes it so great. What if I did something amazing? So I think that's
Um,
interesting.
I actually have this weird thing where I don't like um pronouns in titles. I'm always taking them out. So do you just straight up think titles or do you think other stuff while you walk?
I think a lot of other things. I'm usually, I'm a writer like you, so I'm obsessed about writing and I should be writing, or maybe I should write this way and this person does it that way. And then it'll just shoot through a title. And Natalie Goldberg, do you know who she is?
Mm-mm.
She writes about writing, and she wrote like probably the biggest selling how-to writing book of all time called Writing Down the Bones.
Oh,
And
I do know that. Yeah.
all of her titles are amazing. And my favorite is her memoir when she had cancer, and it's called Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. And
That
so I
is
kind
really
of,
good.
it is. So I try to always think of a title like that.
But I also think that whatever you read, the title becomes great if you like it. It's like the Stepford Wives. What could he have possibly named it that would be so evocative and um yeah, I think there's a certain amount of like because you read it as published, your mind is like, therefore that was a great title if you liked it.
I think so too. And I think, um, there's so much that happens in our brain that we don't know about. And it kind of, when you finally get the right title, you're like, of course, it couldn't have been anything else but this title.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like when it's just a weird thing the way that it works. So, what inspires your stories?
Usually it's something in real life. Like I could go through the whole collection and tell you like the jumping off points. And the first story in the collection, I took my son to the DMV for his road test. This was before the pandemic. And he was really nervous about passing. And I knew he really wanted it. So I was like nervous for him. And I think sometimes when I'm a little bit sort of jacked up, I see more connections and I have more ideas. And so he went to stand where the people taking the test went, and I went to sit in the chairs. And I saw that one driving examiner was a woman. And it occurred to me, I guess, because I think about true crime all the time, that Ted Bundy had taken a road test. And if you know about Ted Bundy, it was like he was always picking up people in his car. And I'm like, did he want to murder the road test person, but couldn't because everyone would know? Like, it's such a weird idea to me that like somebody got in the car with them and maybe it was a woman. And that was the sort of jumping off point for the story. And then I interviewed you and you were super helpful. But um one thing that I was when I was starting the story was thinking about like and you can tell me if this is true, when you're a driving examiner and you're alone with people, do they just have like really bonkers conversations with you? Or are they just so
Sometimes
scared?
there is a bit of fear, and in training, they tell us that lots of people going into a government office are going to be a little nervous. So I'm always empathetic to people that are angry, that are scared, and because I know that it's not really the way that they are. Just so you know, South Carolina has the fastest wait times out of all the DMVs in the United States.
Oh my God, that
Our,
is great.
our average is 8 minutes, and so they're not as bad as they could be, but sometimes they're very, very bad, the customers, and I just try to do that. My nervous people tend to be very quiet, and they are tend to be jumpier. And sometimes they are very talkative, and it can be conversational. And I'll remind them, conversation will be kept to a minimum so you can concentrate. And then sometimes they'll be almost talking to themselves. And I had a, someone testing recently, and he had dressed up really nice. He looked cool. He didn't look like he was from South Carolina. And he had spent some time in California, and then he came back. He was going to
Mhm.
test. And I'd failed him before. And he was in the car with me, and he did a 3-point turn, and he did it crazy. Like, it was super fast. I was like a little bit nervous. I just seemed crazy. And I said, pull over to the side of the road. And I said, you've obviously been practicing. I said, but what's going on? You seem a little manic. Or did you take anything? He said, no, I've just been up all night studying. I said, okay, well, now calm yourself, because you just got to drive normal. And I'm not here trying to fail you. I'm just here marking the things as you do them. So just drive and keep us safe. And then we continued the test, and he passed. He did great. But he was
Oh,
just so
great.
wound up. It was like like fried green tomatoes when Kathy Bates was hitting in that car. That's what it was like. Wild.
Well, my son's driver's ed teacher told the class that when she was a driving examiner, that this one girl, this teenager, they went through the whole test. She did really well. And when they got back to the building, the examiner was like, "You have passed." And the girl went, "Yay!" and took her hands off the steering wheel and like flew forward and bonked the building and then failed. And that was made me really happy. But when I was in college, this friend of mine, her father came through town and he took her and me and a whole bunch of girls out to lunch. And I think he had a lot of wine with lunch because suddenly he was like, "Now, are all you girls on the pill?" And it was the creepiest thing ever. And so when I was writing that story, I was like, oh, I kind of want them to start talking about contraception in some weird way. And that led to the rest of the story, which is about unplanned pregnancy and driving to an abortion. And I wrote the story before Roe v. Wade was overturned because I could only ever write a political story by like total accident. But um, yeah, it was the idea of like being with this person at this very emotional moment was sort of what gave me the idea.
And everything
And
came
my
together.
son passed his test. Sorry, what did you say?
Good for you. And good for him passing. Everything, the elements of the story worked well together, and I kind of was, as the ending was happening, I was going, ah. I was I was enjoying the moment of the inevitable conclusion, they say. Did do you remember all of these tidbits of your life, like the birth control guy at lunch, or do you write them in a diary?
I just remember them. I probably should write them down. There's probably tons I forget, but usually I remember them.
Do you talk about, did you tell other people about the birth control pill lunch before you wrote about it?
Oh, sure. I dined out on it for like 30 years. And there's another story in the collection called Bridesmaid Revisited, where the girl wears a bridesmaid dress to her office job. And I totally did that when I was in my 20s in New York. And um, and then at my job, it was my first time working for this place, which was a bank. I'm sure they called the temp agency and were like, please don't send the girl in the prom dress again. But once I was at my desk and feeling sort of caffeinated, it just struck me as really funny. So I spent the whole day calling people and telling them. And my friend Mary took the train from Subway, I mean, from Brooklyn, like 20 stops to come see me. So that was always a story that I liked and I told people, but it didn't really occur to for me to write an actual story about it until like 2021.
Hmm. It was very unusual, and that's interesting. So that story also contains a little bit of infidelity in it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of your stories have infidelity in them. Even Standard Deviation, the novel.
Totally. And
So
Early Morning Riser. Yeah.
I haven't read Early Morning Riser yet. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
But I've read Single Carefree Mellow, and I have read Standard Deviation. I've read Games and Rituals, and I would read your, the whole series under the pseudonym if you ever revealed it in an interview.
It's not that good. I'll never tell. Um,
Vampire Diaries.
I wish. Um, but I don't like to write about the beginnings of relationships. I I don't do it very well. It's really hard for me. I like to write about the middle of relationships, and sometimes I even like to write about like after the relationship is over, what's the power dynamic? Like there's a story in the collection, Damascus, where the woman and her ex-husband are still very financially and emotionally and sexually embroiled. And I that's always more interesting to me. So if you're starting a relationship in the middle, it's usually like if you're going to move the story along, there's going to be some sort of infidelity or worry about infidelity. I think. I don't know. Plots are hard for me.
What do you mean by that?
Um, just like I really enjoy reading plot-driven novels and stories, but I tend to write more character-driven pieces. And I don't know. I mean, plot is hard for me. That like dialogue is easy. I just sort of listen and I hear it. But I also have a problem like moving people on and off the page. Like the logistics of that is not my strong suit. I mean, every author does things differently. So, but yeah, I think plot is really hard.
Hmm. What is your favorite plot-driven novel?
Mm, maybe Silence of the Lambs. Have you
Is
read
there
it?
is there an author that you read currently who writes a lot of plot-driven things?
Um, I will always and forever read a lot of Stephen King, and his tends to be pretty plot driven. Um, boy, I think anybody who's not me seems plot driven in comparison. Like Lisa Jewell writes, sort of detective-y things. I've always liked detective novels. But I think that would be hard for me to write.
Hmm. I like Dean Koontz,
Yeah.
and he's got a very plot-driven perspective, but he's also a Catholic writer, and his characters don't go to church and they don't mention Jesus or anything, but they are so Catholic. They're so virtuous and they're concerned about virtue and they're concerned about beauty. So as you're reading his novels, he's mentioning artists that you can then Google on your phone and look up like
Yeah.
Hockney. He mentions Hockney's swimming pool period. And so I found this great swimming pool by Hockney, and I was showing everyone at work at the DMV because I always am bringing them information that they don't know about because I'm the literary
Uh-huh.
person. And I shared it with, at the time, it was my work wife. And I said, look at this great picture from David Hockney. And she said, is that Hillary Clinton? And then I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, that looks like Hillary Clinton looking over the edge of the pool. Look for that one, and you can't unsee it now.
Oh, we
It's so
have a
funny.
couple of Hockney prints around our house. Now I want to look.
It's the one, there's someone swimming under the water, and there's this, I thought it was a man, but now it's Hillary Clinton in a peach, I think, pantsuit looking over the edge to the person swimming
Ah.
underwater. And that's the only thing it could be.
Well, one of my favorite books is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. And she said that she got the idea after seeing this portrait that's named Rachel. So I, after my like 10th reading of the book, I ordered a print of it and it is hanging on the wall. And um, it makes you feel like this connection to the author, like, oh, they were looking at that when they got inspired. And yeah, it's really cool. I do that with Dean Koontz too.
Oh, you said you do listen to, you do read Dean Koontz, or you said you do that with Dean Koontz?
I do read Dean Koontz and it always like inspires me to look up something.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I also like that he's so old and he's still prolific. And I just want to just be there until the end because there's plenty of what he's written that I haven't read, and I've got time to do that. But right now I want to, and I've written to him before, and he sent
Did
back
you
a
write
form.
that?
Yeah, he sent back a form letter, and then he wrote a handwritten note on the bottom.
Oh,
And at the time, I was drinking alcohol. I took a break in March because it affects how I can write the next day, even one glass. So I was like,
mhm.
I don't have a book. I'll drink again if I have a book. And the and he had written about Belvedere vodka in his Jane Hawk series. And so I wrote to him and I was like, oh, I like how she always put Belvedere vodka in her Coca-Cola and stayed in a motel. And um, and I guess he liked that I noticed the vodka. But the vodka, I I I recommend against it because it's very long and you can't really put it in your freezer. And I like cold vodka, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to get in there unless you get a little bottle. But it's still like very tall for a little bottle. I don't know if you've ever seen the Belvedere bottle.
Yeah, it is really tall.
It's awkward. So if someone said, Katherine Heiny, I want to write a character-driven story or novel, how would you tell them to do it?
Ooh. Um, well, I think that people write um that you end up writing what you're good at and what you can do. And I mean, I guess every once in a while somebody sits down and is like, I'm going to write a bestseller and they do it. But um, um, when I when I graduated from from college and grad school, I was reading a lot of John Updike, a lot of Margaret Atwood, you know, these very brilliant but very serious writers. And then my husband and I moved to England, and my first week living there, I read Bridget Jones's Diary and High Fidelity by Nick Hornby back to back. And I was like, this is the best place in the world. I just want to live here. And I was 29, and I think that I don't know, those books really shaped me. I was like, these are the kind of books I want to write that are funny and that are sort of about daily life. And they just made so much sense to me, even though it was like another 20 years before I wrote my first book. Um, so I think that when you read something like that, like Stephen King always talks about reading Ray Bradbury, or like when you find a writer who speaks to you so strongly, then that's sort of that's the hint that that's what you're meant to write.
Hmm, I like that. I also like that you talk about your novels and your stories being funny because I left a review about standard deviation. I hope on Goodreads. It could have been on Amazon. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not leaving reviews on this one, only this one I get too involved. But I said it was a funny literary novel. Who knew they existed? And another thing that I loved about standard deviation is that it celebrated the extrovert at a time when there was a lot of introvert propaganda. They had that book out, Quiet, The Power of an Introvert in an Extroverted World, or something like that.
Mhm.
And I'm an extrovert. So I was like, I guess I'm just, my life is crap because I'm not an introvert. If I was introvert, I could be better at math. And then I read Standard Deviation. Is Audrey, is that her name?
Audra. Yeah.
Audra. It's like, look at Audra. She's celebrated and she's great, and her on the spectrum husband thinks she's great. The extroverts are great. And I told a professor at Coker College, which is now Coker University, where I went, but then I was like teaching there a little bit. Julia Klimek, she was in the English department. Now she's in interdisciplinary studies. But I said I read a novel about that celebrated extroverts, and I told her the name of it, and she wrote it down. So I don't know if she ever read it, but um,
Ah.
I was amazed that you did that, and also from the perspective of a man, you did very well.
Well, it started because I was writing a lot of short stories, and we were living in the Netherlands, and there was this thing at my son's school called Monday Morning Networking, which was where you could go there and they would teach you how to count to 10 in Dutch and like the Dutch word for chicken. And I thought it was really boring and condescending, and I never did it. And then, but every morning, my husband and I would walk our sons out to the bus stop, and my neighbor was there one Monday, and I was like, "You look nice. You're all dressed up." And she was like, "Oh, I have Monday morning networking." And I was like, "Don't you find that so tedious?" And she's like, "Well, no, because I started it and I'm the president of it." And I was like, "Oh, well, I meant it was tedious before you were the president of it. And I really hear great things about it. And if I weren't, I just kept talking until my husband like grabbed my back of my collar and dragged me into the house. And I was like, that was so awkward. And he was like, you made it awkward. And I'm like, how so? And he's like, you don't have to say whatever you're feeling. And I'm like, oh yeah, maybe not. And that was the day that I started writing a story about an introverted man who was married to an extroverted woman. But I think that I am much more Graham than Audra.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'm much more, although my family told me while I was writing the book that I did become more extroverted, but then I reverted back. But she was always so much fun to write about because she's totally different than I am, different from
I
me.
I did for a minute. Everybody got really into Myers Briggs, and maybe they're still into it, but they were really into it when that book came out. And I discovered that I am an ENTP, which is a very rare Myers-Briggs score. I think 3% of the population is an ENTP, and mostly men are ENTPs. We like to argue for the sake of arguing, and we are a little bit haphazard. We're not conscientious, but we're more thinking based rather than feeling based, which makes us argumentative, and it annoys everyone because we're like, no, this we're having fun. Why are you upset? I'm devil's advocating everyone here at the table. Why is everyone mad at me? I'm just having fun. And I looked up like ENTP, famous ENTP, and then I stumbled into ENTP characters, and I found out that a lot of characters in sitcoms or dramedies are ENTPs, according to
Ah,
people on Reddit, because they think of crazy things to do and they intellectualize them and then they go and do them. An example would be um, Californication. David
mhm.
Duchovny's character is an ENTP. I Love Lucy's an ENTP. So they think of something to do and they go execute it and it doesn't work out. And that's
Well, this is not perfectly related to that, but we went to Florida for my son's spring break, and we were in the pool, and my husband got out of the pool, and this guy who was sitting on a lounger chair was like, um, I heard your British accent. Do you know anything about World War II? Which is like one of my husband's main interests. And so Ian talked to this guy for like half an hour, and I was like, if I had thought to do this for our anniversary, I would have done it because it made you so happy. It was like some weird kind of specific honey trap. I was like, where was this guy? Where'd he come from? How often does he sit there saying to people, do you know about? But it made Ian super, super happy. So who am I to argue with that?
Well, and that sounds like the kind of an ENTP thing they would do. They'll throw facts out there. It's called fact nerd. Did you know that?
Uh,
Did you know that? And that's definitely the kind of thing that I would say to somebody. Just like whatever comes to your mind, hey, or I do this one joke whenever I meet someone who has the same first name as a famous person, like say someone's name is Brittany, I always go, are you related to Britney Spears? It has nothing to do.
oh, I love that though.
It just is shocking to them. Like, hey, my name is Renee Smith. Are you related to Renee Zellweger? Like, it just,
Well, Ian says that it doesn't happen so much anymore, but that when he first moved to America and people heard his accent, they would ask him if he knew the royal family.
hmm.
So maybe they were teasing him and he just never realized.
I don't, well, if it were me, it would be teasing. Um, but I think a lot of people in America just think the royal family is just right there, because like
Oh, yeah.
we know our mayors, we know sometimes you meet the governor, sometimes you meet your congressperson. You definitely meet like any kind of local official, school board members, things like that. So I guess they thought maybe they just bumped to the royal family.
Yeah, I guess so. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's true.
Hmm, that is interesting. I never got. I always knew the royal family were very far away from the regular public. Um, I don't know how I always knew that, but I'm not one of those people that keep up with the royal things. Although lately, after watching Kristen Stewart in that Princess Diana movie, I'm much more intrigued with the royals.
I thought that movie was so great. It was so weird, but so great. And I was just like, wait, is it Princess Diana or Kristen Stewart? She was so, yeah, yeah. I really, really liked that movie.
I liked it too, and I own it on Blu-ray now, and it's a Christmas movie, so you can watch it every
Oh,
year, and um, and things that they took poetic license with, like when she asked the one man to leave the room, and I won't say on camera what she said, but it was so absurd. It's like, did Princess Diana really say that? I don't know, but I hope that she did. I think she's a little bit more defiant in the movie than she might have been in real life.
yeah. But no, I thought that movie was really creative, really thought provoking. And even though you know the whole story, it was still kind of suspenseful. It was like that movie should not have worked. There were like 100 reasons why it shouldn't have worked, and then I just loved it.
I feel exactly the same, um, and in the weighing before, you have the Christmas meal. It seems so much more sinister now that we know that Princess Diana struggled with bulimia and things like that. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that poor weighing her like that.
I know. That
And
was
what's
great.
interesting is that her lineage is the lineage to King Henry VIII. It is not from King Charles. They're not
I
related to
think I
him.
knew that. Yeah.
You said you did know that?
I think so. Yeah.
So they really needed the Spencers to like kind of legitimize their lineage because apparently they're not British or they're not from the royals at least. Um,
Yeah.
Interesting. Hmm. What would you say has always been the purpose of your art?
I think that all writers write to make sense of the world. That's how they process the world. And well, also what's really funny is that I am just like other writers. Like I think all writers, if you say this is obviously like based on or this character was inspired by this person, most writers get really angry and are like, no, I made that up. And that's the way I feel. But then when I read some other book, it can be like two woolly mammoths fighting, and I'm like, there is trouble in that marriage. I guarantee it. And um, actually, there was a story, Blue Heron Bridge, in my first collection that when I was writing it, I said to my husband, like, what should the husband be like? And he was like, I want him to be older and British and a mathematician. And I was like, everyone's gonna think that's you. And he's like, why? Like, because you're older and British and a mathematician. And he was like, I don't think people really think that way. And I was like, they really do. Um, but but yeah, I think that that is definitely I write to make sense of the world, and I think that's a big part of why I read too. And as I get older and older, I feel like more and more of my brain is given over to um like I can basically not see, like if I see a jelly bean on the floor or some random thing, I immediately think of like three books that maybe dealt with that. I feel like I'm less in the world and more imaginary as time goes on.
Do you think that you'll ever switch over and write exclusively about true things? Do you think you'll ever write nonfiction?
I write nonfiction pieces sometimes, and they're really interesting and they're really fun, but I don't think, I mean, I'd love to read memoirs, but I don't think I'll ever write one. I don't know why. I just don't think I will.
I love to read memoirs too, and and they work. Like things that won't work in fiction work in memoir.
Yeah. Did you
Why
read
is
A
that?
Beautiful, Terrible Thing?
Say that again.
Did you read A Beautiful, Terrible Thing? It's
I
about this woman whose marriage like explodes.
No, but I've heard the title. Who wrote that?
Wait, you're breaking up.
Oh, I am I broken up now?
No,
Okay.
it's better now.
No, I who wrote it? I remember hearing the
It's
title.
written by Jen Wade.
Hmm.
And if you like sort of memoirs about people's messy emotional lives, it's a really good one.
Hmm. I'll try it. I remember I just get really intrigued by real life stuff, and I want to, especially if I know that it's nonfiction, I want to suss out everything, that
Mhm.
it came from. And I remember reading Danny Shapiro's memoir, Inheritance, and I told some other writer friends, I said, I could not put this book down. They were like, really? I didn't think it was that captivating. And I was just like, no, I had to know who was her real dad. Um, and then I read Gloria Naylor's autobiographical novel, 1996,
Mhm.
where the NSA started harassing her. And I wanted to know, did she just live on St. Helena Island in South Carolina and make up everything, or did she just change the names? And I talked to Tao Lin about it because someone had recommended the book to him, and then he wrote about it on Twitter. And he said that I think she just changed the names, and then I just had to go and see what I could see. I wasn't expecting to find anything, but I thought I could at least go up to Gloria Naylor's old house and be like, "Did you know Gloria Naylor used to live here? She writes about it right here." And then I discovered the whole thing, and I found out who the real bad guys were. She changed the names, and so I just will suss out anything. I've been to the French restaurant that Natalie Goldberg mentions and Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. It's like, well, I'm going to try that restaurant
Mhm.
too. And there are even parts like I think about the bodega that the one man called from. He would call his girlfriend from. I think about that bodega too. Like I could see that. It seems like a real one. I want to go visit it. Is that one based on a real one?
Well, oh, kind of. Yeah, that's our bodega. That was the bodega we lived above. Um, but like I I also like every year I read the whole Little House series all over again. But even when I'm not reading it, I'm like, I think about Ma's life and how much it sucked. And I don't know how they had to like scramble up every single thing for every meal. I don't know. I think about pioneer days. I don't know. I think that, everybody talks about being present, and I think I am present, but I think I'm always thinking about stuff I've read too, in a way that people who don't read a lot of fiction don't do.
Hmm. What's the most important thing that fiction adds to a person's life?
Um, I think the idea that you're not alone, and it's that moment when you read something in a book, and even if it's just like a description of something that is so spot on that you feel that like jolt of connection. Um, that's such a great thing.
Hmm.
It's a small thing, but I mean, and obviously then there are books that, I think that when I was younger, I didn't, as a teenager, like my parents were always like, you need to stop reading and go out and go for a walk or something. And I was like, I can't put this book down. And I look back on that and I'm like, really, if I knew what a rare and wonderful thing it is not to be able to put a book down. Like, I think I was right and my parents were wrong, and I could have just continued and had a vitamin D deficiency from lack of sunlight. But I don't know, to have a book and be in the middle of a book and be like, I have to see how this ends. I think that's such a gift from a writer to a person I can't even tell you.
Well, I think you've definitely given us a gift with your stories and novels, especially Standard Deviation. I'm still thinking um, about Graham and Audra and his seeing her come out of that hotel room or walking out of the hotel at the
Well,
very end, and
yeah.
then he just kind of continues. Do you think you'll ever revisit them?
I don't think so. A lot of people have asked me that, but and it would be kind of easy. And actually, when like I turned it into my editor, and then I thought of this joke where that happens about halfway through the book, where somebody says that their eyes were bigger than their stomach at a meal, and Audra's like, "How big is your stomach?" And I thought of that, and I called the manuscript back. I was like, wait, I need another day so I can fit this joke in because it seemed so specific. So I think it would be easy in a lot of ways because Audra was really fun to write about. But I liked the way it ended, and I liked where they all were. I don't think I would want to go back there and like shake it up again.
I think that that's a good call. As a reader, I want more. And as a writer, I know that you're supposed to always leave them wanting more. Like Graham and Audra are, they're still there. It's like the movie Whiplash. Did you see that movie?
Yeah.
They are still playing. He's still conducting and he's still hitting that drum and they're still gazing at each other. Like it ends perfectly and they're still there. And I think that there is enough tension in standard deviation that Graham and Audra are still right where they are. And that says a lot because there's a lot of things that end and I'm completely unconcerned with it. Like Birdman, which came out, I think was nominated for Best Picture the same time as Whiplash. And the first time you watch Birdman, you can't get enough of it. The second time, you're a little bored. And I found out from my friend Donald Quist, who's a writer, he said they would say that it lacks tension if you can't watch it the second time.
Oh, yeah.
And so it keeps tension because you don't know what's happening. And then once you know what's happening, it doesn't have tension. And I think that standard deviation has that tension in it forever, and Whiplash does also.
Well, my cousin Rachel, the Daphne du Maurier book, the big question is, was she a murderer or not? And the book is sort of open-ended about that. So I think that's why you can read it a million times and you see come with different sort of depending on what's going on in your own life, you see it through that lens of whether she's guilty or innocent. It's the same sort of thing. Yeah, the tension.
Notes on a Scandal, which is based on a book.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
British book, and that one is open ended. It's more open ended than the movie, but the movie's open ended in its own way. And I
Um,
watch both of those, and I read the book multiple times too.
I read that book maybe like every 2 years. I'm so afraid it's going to get stale, but it never ever does. I also
Uh,
really like um, We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. That's an amazing book.
I watched the movie, and actually, I thought about that movie today. I think about when Tilda Swinton is walking in town, and that woman just slaps her in the face, and you don't know what's happened first for her to earn that slap. Is that slap in the book?
No, but there's a sort of equivalent of it.
Okay, I'll read the book.
Yeah, it's
Because
very, very good.
the movie was just so dark that I didn't go to the book. And Notes on a Scandal is a little bit more cringe than dark. So I was able
Yeah,
to revisit that a little bit more, but
yeah.
I'll check
That's
that
a
out.
great, great book. And I love the movie too. Yeah.
Good. I like that we have so much in common with our
Mhm.
taste in books and movies. It's because of the McCready.
Yeah. Well, I married into it. I was gonna say it's in our blood, but
Yeah,
um
you got good
yeah,
taste. That's what it is.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So the Paul Leslie Hour is a podcast that used to be a radio show out of Atlanta, and now he's in Charleston. And the Paul Leslie Hour always gives the last portion of the interview over to the person who's interviewing. And he always lets them know that whatever they say now has the potential to go out to anyone across the world and maybe beyond. And he lets them take over the show to say whatever is on their heart or their mind. And Katherine Heiny, that is now your turn. It's come to that time, and you get to say whatever you want. The whole world, all of humanity, maybe even 100 years from now, they're going to hear this. What do you want to say?
Oh, it's so I can't believe this is my shot at like posterity, but I've been listening to this podcast called Celebrity Memoir Book Club. And it's so funny and it's so great. And because I have like no discipline, like I just listen, I'm like another episode, another episode. And my husband keeps saying, like, what did you think of this current event? And I'm like, I don't know, because I literally do nothing but listen to celebrity memoir podcasts. I think he thinks I'm like exaggerating, but I'm really not. So I would say everybody go listen to it. It's so funny. It makes me so happy and it inspires me to write. So there you go. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Katherine Heiny.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you. I'm going to go watch Whiplash. That was a good movie.
Maybe I'll watch it again too. It was my pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, take care.
You
Bye.
too.